Chapter 3. Watering Flowers. The next day, when Zongjia Mingjue woke up from his confused state of sleep, he found Li Lianhua's bed empty. It turned out that Li Lianhua was watering the flowers in the garden outside the door, with a ladle made of an old gourd. He was watering them very carefully, tenderly touching the stems and leaves of the flowers every so often. He seemed to be in quite the good mood. 3 people were standing in the garden, with various expressions on their faces. One was Yu Hongzhu, the other was Yu Qiushuang's friend, Yun Jiao, and the other was the Yu Palace's housemaid, Zhou Fu. Yu Hongzhu's face was red with anger, Yun Jiao's eyes were shiny with tears, and Zhou Fu's face was full of worry and anxiety. Zongjia Mingjue got up and washed his face, and when he made his way into the garden, he learned that Li Lianhua had told Yu Hongzhu the cause of Qiushuang's death. This was why Yu Hongzhu was furious. Her own daughter was killed, and the murderer had the guts to pretend to be a ghost to deceive her. If she didn't hunt down and kill the murderer herself, she would give up her family name. Yun Jiao was terrified when she heard the news, while Zhou Fu was skeptical. After Li Lianhua had finished talking about why Qiushuang didn't seem to be killed by a ghost, he had asked Zhou Fu very seriously where the gourd ladle was, and then to everyone's surprise went to water the flowers in high spirits. Zongjia Mingjue stood looking over the white jade railing of the Yu Palace garden. He spotted Li Lianhua's calm figure in the flowers, and he stared for a long time, sighing. He had been thinking the entire night before he managed to sort out his thoughts on the matter. He had come to the conclusion that there were 7 unexplained things about the ghost in the Blue Window incident. First, why did the murderer kill Qiushuang in that way? Second, how had Qiushuang's body ended up in Cheng Yunhe's cargo box? Third, who was behind the ghost illusion in the window? Fourth, what was the source of the ghostly song outside the window? Fifth, how did the person behind everything go from Xiaomian Inn and get into Yu City? Sixth, why did the murderer decide to kill such a sweet and innocent girl as Qiushuang? And 7th, why was the murderer pretending to be a ghost, of all things? Zongjia Mingjue could only answer 2 of these 7 questions, but the man he had been counting on to provide him with more answers was now busy watering flowers. Just when he was getting more and more confused, Li Lianhua suddenly turned around, holding the gourd ladle, and smiled softly at him. "The sun has risen. Shouldn't Master Yu Mulan be up by now?" Then he turned to Yu Hongzhu and said politely, "I am afraid I am not skilled enough. Although Miss Yu can't be cured, if you would just allow me to speak to your husband and do my best for you and your family, I promise that my efforts will not be in vain. Will you trust me, Madam Yu?" As he spoke these words, Zongjia Mingjue was sure that even 10,000 people would find it difficult to refuse him. Not to mention that deep down, Yu Hongzhu was anxious for Li Lianhua to meet her husband, so she nodded her head repeatedly. Yun Jiao wiped away her tears and said in a low voice, "Then I'll go back to my room to rest." "Yes, go ahead, Miss Yun. Take care of yourself," Li Lianhua said softly. Yu Hongzhu led him to Yu Mulan's room, and along the way he saw the true luxury of the wealth of Yu City. The pearl and jade decorations of the palace shimmered beautifully. With a bright smile on his face, Li Lianhua glanced at the gold, silver, and jewels as they walked around the hallway. It really was an unimaginable luxury to be as rich as the Yu family was. When they arrived at Yu Mulan's room, they saw the man sitting still with a stunned look in his fixed eyes. He didn't even flinch when they came in. Yu Hongzhu said, "He's been like this ever since the fire broke out that night. He doesn't even think about food or sleep. He just sits there and stays still and silent." Yu Hongzhu continued to explain that all of the doctors who had seen him had said that Yu Mulan had been possessed, and another doctor suddenly went crazy as he was simply taking Yu Mulan's pulse. Li Lianhua listened intently and hummed. When Yu Hongzhu was finished speaking, Li Lianhua looked into Yu Mulan's eyes. After a moment, he took out a silver needle from his satchel and slowly aimed it at Yu Mulan's eye. Yu Hongzhu was stunned. She had never seen a doctor treat a disease like this. Zongjia Mingjue stood beside her, stunned as well. After listening to his words, Yu Hongzhu knew that Li Lianhua was definitely not a fool, but like Zongjia Mingjue, she often found it difficult to understand his words and actions. The 2 looked blankly at each other as Li Lianhua's silver needle got closer and closer to Yu Mulan's right eye. He didn't stop, only continued to slowly move the needle. Zongjia Mingjue and Yu Hongzhu waited and waited, debating on whether they should intervene. Suddenly, just when the silver needle was about to puncture his eye, Li Lianhua stopped and moved the needle to the other eye. All the while, Yu Mulan didn't even blink. "He really has gone insane," Li Lianhua thought. "Master Yu seems to be very ill," Li Lianhua said, sighing lightly and putting the needle away. People like Zongjia Mingjue, who only had casual interactions with him, would never have imagined that Li Lianhua didn't have even the slightest medical skills. Both Zongjong Mingjue and Yu Hongzhu frowned deeply. When I was in the Yu Palace's garden, I spotted a wonderful plant that is used to cure this type of madness. Madam, may I go pick some of this to help your husband get better? Li Lianhua asked kindly. Yu Hongzhu nodded. Do whatever you please. She was a bit skeptical. The flowers in the garden had all been planted by her own hands, so she knew of every flower very well. These ordinary flowers, such as jasmine, peony, and magnolia, were considered a cure. She wondered if these flowers had other medicinal properties that she hadn't known about. Li Lianhua stepped out the door and suddenly climbed up the white jade railing, looking around for a moment and climbing down. He slowly walked back towards the garden, which wasn't far away. There was a patch of yellow flowers growing on the corner of the house, and Li Lianhua walked over to break off 2 leaves. Zongjong Mingjue suddenly became worried. Physician Li, that's heartbreak grass. It's highly poisonous. Li Lianhua frowned. No need to worry. He continued to break off more branches until his arms were full of the poisonous grass. He looked up at the room beside the garden. Whose room is that, may I ask? Yu Hongzhu said. It's a guest room. Li Lianhua nodded, walked around to the peony bushes, gazed at the blooming peonies for a moment, and then suddenly began pulling out a bunch of strange-looking branches from underneath the bush. Yu Hongzhu and Zongjong Mingjue glanced at each other as they watched Li Lianhua go back and forth in the garden, picking 6 different plants. Of the 6, Zongjong Mingjue knew 3. The heartbreak grass, which was highly poisonous, the other 2, which were only slightly poisonous, and he didn't recognize the other 3. Just as Li Lianhua finished gathering the plants he needed, he gave a soft, "Ah." Zongjong Mingjue instinctively started to panic when he heard the sound. What is it? What's wrong? Li Lianhua crouched on the ground leading to another corridor outside the garden. He saw a clear and wet footprint. When Li Lianhua had watered the flowers that morning, he had made sure to splash the whole garden with water. Just now, when everyone was in Yu Mulan's room, it seemed that someone had passed by the garden, stepped in the water, and left a footprint on the ground. The strange thing was that there was only 1 footprint, so it seemed that the person only took 1 step into the freshly watered grass. Li Lianhua picked up a stone from the ground, used it to scratch a mark next to the footprints, stood up, and straightened his clothes. Zongjong Mingjue looked at the footprint in surprise, then raised his head to look in the direction of the corridor. Whose footprint is this? Yu Hongzhu suddenly said coldly. It's Yun Jiao's. Li Lianhua looked at Yu Hongzhu, confused. How do you know that? Yu Hongzhu was seething with anger. Since Qiu Shuang's death, she has stayed here in Yu Palace. There is a rumor that she is in love with Mingjue. That girl, she came here with Mingjue, and I have seen her sneaking around the city and gazing at him more than once. Li Lianhua sighed and shook his head. Mingjue's face became red with embarrassment. Madam, I didn't... Yu Hongzhu interrupted him. I know, otherwise I would have kicked you out. Mingjue only became more and more embarrassed. Li Lianhua smiled slightly, deciding not to comment on the situation between Yu Qiushuang, Yun Jiao, and Zongjong Mingjue. Master Zongjong, can you do me a favor? What is it? Mingjue asked. Li Lianhua waved to him and whispered something in his ear. Zongjong Mingjue's eyes widened. How did you know? Li Lianhua smiled. Guess. Then he said a few more words softly, and Yu Hongzhu listened as well, trying to hear. Li Lianhua's internal strength wasn't the best, so he couldn't send his voice clearly and properly to Mingjue's ears, and the words came muddled. Fire, you go. Yu Mulan is the truth. After listening, Yu Hongzhu was very confused and wondered, could it be that Li Lianhua had solved this whole thing after only walking through the palace, watering the flowers, and checking Yu Mulan's eyes with a silver needle? She had never cared so much about a person's answer in her life. Physician Li, have you discovered the truth about the many tragedies that have been happening here? Li Lianhua just laughed and ah, and this time Yu Hongzhu understood why he would make this charming ah sound. It was a habit Li Lianhua had formed when he was thinking about things, or when he was being absent-minded. And sure enough, he turned his head to look at Yu Hongzhu and asked blankly, Oh, I'm ashamed, quite ashamed. What did you ask me just now? What exactly did Li Lianhua want Zongjong Mingjue to do? Before Yu Hongzhu had time to guess, Li Lianhua turned around and handed her the 6 kinds of plants that he held against his chest. Madam, please cut these into small pieces and soak them in clean water. Have Master Yu take the tea as medicine after half a day of soaking it. No need to boil, he said very seriously. It will take effect immediately after it's ingested. Yu Hongzhu took the herbs, rather confused. Every time she thought she had this man figured out, he would do something else to surprise her. When she looked at Li Lianhua more, she felt that she really should just give up on trying to understand him at all. In that sense, she was a lot like Zongjung Mingjue. They both couldn't see the real intentions of this man's words and actions. Indeed, Li Lianhua was a complete mystery from head to toe.